If you've been considering getting into real estate because you've heard lots of stories about the successes that lots of people can have, but maybe you're also a little trepidatious because you've also heard stories about people who have lost it all, that's why in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you my entire journey from when I bought my first property in 2008 to where I am today in January of 2025. This way, you'll be able to visualize not only how to go about getting started in real estate, but also have a more realistic picture of both the good and the bad that can come with real estate investing. I'm James Masotti, and I'm the owner of Our Team Accounting, and on this channel, I am passionate about helping business owners and entrepreneurs achieve their personal and professional goals through intentional financial planning. So let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so how did I actually get started in real estate investing is a very common way that many people actually get started in real estate investing, and that is through the path of the accidental landlord. And what that realistically means is I was very fortunate to be able to buy my very first property in the tail end of 2008. And for those of you who are maybe too young to remember, or those of you who have chosen to block out the really terrible memories of that time, this was right at the start of the financial market crash. And what that meant was that the house that I bought, I was able to buy for $77,000 as a foreclosure, and I was actually able to buy it with no money down because of a special program that was in place at the time. Fast forward, this was done in October of 2008, and if you were to rewind just a little bit to like January, February, March of that same year, identical houses on the exact same street, this was a row home, were selling in for $150,000, $160,000, $170,000. And so at this point, the market had started to collapse, and I was in a position to be able to take advantage of buying this property. Now, this property was not some glamorous, luxurious, amazing property. It was a 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath row home. The day that I moved in, there was a giant 3-foot hole in the middle of the dining room for where a flooding issue had happened on the bathroom above it. And when we got the water turned on, there was a plumbing leak. And so I used a red Solo cup to go ahead and catch the water drips that were coming down while I slept on the air mattress on the floor. And so if that doesn't sound like your idea of a lot of fun, then your entry into real estate investing might be a little bit more challenging. But that is where I got started. And I slowly fixed up this property while I was living in it. Yes, we eventually fixed that hole in the ceiling. We absolutely got the plumbing leak fixed. We went on to fix things like the HVAC and get the heat working. We had to do some, reinforcing and pulling up subfloors and different things along those lines, getting a new roof on the house. And all of that was kind of done as I was working and building up money in my savings account, and because I was fully planning to live in this property for a long period of time. However, I ended up getting a call from my employer asking me if I would be willing to relocate to California in order to take advantage of an opportunity that they had in the office out there. And as part of that, I negotiated that I was going to keep my house in Wilmington, Delaware, and I was going to start renting it out. So I went online and I tried to source a property manager and found one that was going to be able to rent out the property. And I moved to California, where I spent the next several months working in that particular office. After about 9 or 10 months out there, though, I managed to get engaged, and there was no longer an opportunity in California, and they wanted me to either relocate to the Chicago area or ultimately back home to New Jersey, where my wife and I then decided that we were going to buy another house. And so rather than making the tenants in the home that I already had move out, we decided we were going to go ahead and let them stay. And that next property was the one that, again, my wife and I purchased for us to live in. And the reason I say that that was the next property is when we fast forward a little bit later in this story, I eventually also converted this property into another rental property. And so one of the key ways that is very common for people to get started in real estate investing is to actually buy a home that is in some form of distress, whether it's a foreclosure or a short sale, or maybe it's simply a home that has been usually lived in by an older individual or older couple and hasn't been updated for a really long time. And so you're able to purchase that property for below a market value, and then you're able to spend time and sweat equity in rehabbing the property and bringing it up to market standards, and then being able to also take advantage of owner occupant mortgages where you can put lower down payments down onto properties. So for the next 6 years, a lot of my focus was simply based on trying to grow my career, build some additional cash and equity. And I really didn't have this big idea around like becoming a real estate investor or using that as a strategy for growing my wealth. Well, I'm taking a big pause in my real estate investing journey in the story right now. We're gonna take a quick pause in the video to ask you to put in the comments below, what is the biggest thing that's holding you back from getting started in your real estate investing journey? So at this point in the story, we're going to fast forward to 2015. And at this point, I've been working at Amazon for a little while in the Amazon Logistics division, which this was very early on in Amazon Logistics. Again, this day and age of January 2025, most people are accustomed to seeing blue Amazon vans driving all over their neighborhoods, delivering their packages. And that's not the day and age that we're talking about back in 2015. We were still using white unmarked vans and outsourced delivery providers. And most of the people didn't even have uniforms at that particular time. And we had a new employee that came in from UPS who had been investing in real estate in Philly and had really great success. And we got to talking, and he really encouraged me to go ahead and start actively looking to be investing, and shared with me some of the strategies that he had used to be able to purchase his real estate portfolio. And it's at this time that I started looking in my area of Southern New Jersey, trying to identify properties that I would be interested in either flipping in order to be able to make some extra money, or to be able to have as a buy and hold rental property. Now, that process went on for many months, and after doing a lot of underwriting and really kind of trying to crunch the numbers on deals, I was never able to find a property that I was going to be able to purchase given the available funds that I had, or what I thought I was going to be able to qualify for when working with either a hard money lender or directly with a bank on a renovation loan. It's also during this time that I discovered the website biggerpockets.com and their real estate podcast as well. During that time, I got on the forums and I started learning from a lot of folks who had a lot of success, not only in the areas around Philadelphia, but all across the country, and started learning the strategies that they used for being able to analyze deals, for being able to get capital from investors, as well as the buying the real estate is only a piece of it. You eventually also have to manage the property once you have it as well. And at the time that I first started getting involved on the Bigger Pockets platform, they really only had like one book at that point that they had published. And the founder of Bigger Pockets, Joshua Dorkin, and his podcast co-host, Brandon Turner, had a book out that was all about how to get started in investing in real estate. And it was a very top level view of things at that point in time. And it really kind of gave me a little bit of, that intro to all of the steps that I was going to have to go through in the process. Over the next couple of years, over the next period of time, they also started coming out with some additional books. And so Brandon Turner ended up coming out with the book on how to manage rental properties that he wrote with his wife, as well as another book called Rental Property Investing. These books were extremely formative as I started looking at opportunities and really started using them as a framework that was going to allow me to look at and analyze deals, as well as how I was going to manage those properties moving forward. Now, I did get started utilizing a property manager, and there's more of a story behind that we'll cover in a future video as well. Some other great books and resources that started to come out that really influenced me during this period of time that I was involved on the Bigger Pockets website was the book on flipping houses by Jay Scott. And although I wasn't flipping houses at this particular point in time, it really gave me an idea on looking at how to build out rehab budgets and manage rehab costs and get a sense for what things cost, so that when I walked into a property, I felt a lot more prepared for being able to put budgets and proposals together and be able to understand if the quotes that I was getting from contractors to do work were in the frame of reference and ballpark for something that I could afford as I was building out budgets to look at properties. A couple of other books that I looked at during this period of time as well was the book on long distance real estate investing by David Green, Raising Private Capital by Matt Faircloth, and Investing in Real Estate with No and Low Money Down, also by Brandon Turner. All of these books were very influential in terms of being able to pull different elements of things together that allowed me to really move forward in my real estate investing journey. But at the time on Bigger Pockets, they had what was called their Bigger Pockets Marketplace. And this was an area where members of the community could post deals that they had for sale, whether they were pocket listings from retail agents or they were from wholesalers. Or just investors who were looking to sell off parts of their portfolio, there was a place where you could put these listings. And somebody put a listing up in Wilmington, Delaware, which is where my existing property already was. So I had a property manager in place. And so when I quick looked at the numbers and kind of comped it out, I was like, hey, this particular property might actually pencil out and be able to cash flow. And so I went and I took a look at the property and decided to go ahead and make an offer. And we ended up closing on that particular property. So that property was closed on in February 2016. And in order to close on that property, I called a longtime friend of mine who I knew had more money than what I had available. And I had no idea how much money, and basically said, hey, I'm interested in going to buy this property. Would you be willing to be my investor on the acquisition side of it? And I think that the renovations are going to be, I think the number was like $20,000 or something along those lines. And I basically asked him to loan me the funds to purchase the property, and I was going to finance the acquisition or the renovations all on my own. So he agreed to that, and we went ahead and we put all the proper mortgage and notes in place so that he was secured against the real estate. We negotiated what I would be paying him on the interest rate, and we went to town on starting the construction on that particular property. And we'll just say it was quite a wild ride. As we started peeling back different layers, we found way more issues with that particular property than we knew what to do with, including the fact that the entire backside of the house was missing an entire chunk of the framing that had completely rotted away. And instead of fixing it, they had just put up about 3 inches thick of drywall to hold the back of the house up on the first floor. And so that's not really to code and a good way to be able to support a 2-story row home. And so as we peeled things back, we had to dig down the footers deeper because they had also rotted out and were not into the ground. We had to rebuild the backside of the house. We had a number of plumbing issues that we had to do. And basically that renovation project, instead of costing me $20,000, cost me north of $60,000 to complete. At this point, I had exhausted my capital and had actually tapped into a loan from my 401k in order to be able to complete the renovation. By the time the property was renovated, it was fantastic though. We had to do so much work that it was a really, really great property, and it showed phenomenally well. And by the time we got it rented, we were able to get what at the time was top dollar market rents for that particular property. And it rented very quickly. Even though I had that entire experience, I decided to go ahead and purchase a second property in October of that same year. And this particular one was actually a foreclosure property from the Fannie Mae foreclosure program, which was called HomePath. And we were able to make an offer on that property. We were able to buy it. And that one went a lot more streamlined. The budget that we went into that property with was much better. The same investor who loaned me the money on the first property agreed to loan me the money on the second property acquisition as well. And again, we were able to finance through our own means, again, the renovations on that particular property. And the way that we went about doing that basically was we had been able to do a cash out refinance on the first property once we got all of the work done. And so a lot of the extra funds that had been pulled out, we were able to get back at that particular point. So now that we've got this second property done, my friend, who at the time again had been my investor on these properties, sat me down and said, okay, enough of this. I want to be a part of the ride for the equity side of things. And we basically negotiated that we were going to become 50-50 partners, and we were going to move forward from that perspective so that he could also benefit from the equity. So this gets into a whole nother topic about partnering with folks in real estate or in business in general. And that is a video that I will go much deeper into, because partnerships can be a fantastic thing, but they can also be something that you really need to watch out for. And making sure you have strong partnership agreements is incredibly important to make sure these are really positive and beneficial relationships, but also that you cover what's going to happen when you eventually disagree on a path forward. It was also about this time that I started to put together my investment prospectus to recruit and get funds from other investors. And this was really a critical moment in time for being able to expand and accelerate our investment process. And so I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the description below, or you can go ahead and scan the QR code on your screen to get a copy of the investment prospectus that I put together to share with investors. I was very fortunate to be able to get feedback from other folks who were lending private money and who had used private money to get a sense of what kinds of things that investors would be interested in wanting to know and learn about in order to get comfortable with the types of investments that they might be making. And so for our next chapter of the story is when we really get into our significant expansion of the real estate acquisitions that we did. At this point in the story, we're around July of 2017, and there was a property that came up on the market that needed a little bit of work in one of the nicer areas of Wilmington, Delaware. And we were able to put in an offer on this particular property pretty quickly after it had been listed, and we got that particular property. So while it was a little bit of a stretch for us in terms of budget and how we were going to be able to secure the financing, it was in a really great part of town, close to restaurants, and a more desirable place to be that we could afford to pay a little bit more because we were also going to get more rents on that particular property. Then fast forward to October 2017, and this is when we had our opportunity to buy our first portfolio. There was a business owner in the city of Wilmington who over a period of time had accumulated a portfolio of again, I can't remember the exact number. I want to say probably 20 or 30 properties that they had accumulated. And they were starting to get into the position where they wanted to basically wind down their holdings. And the particular holdings that we acquired at this time were actually 4 homes all directly in a row. And one of those homes was being used as part of the extension of their office. So their office building was actually in front of these particular properties. And when they needed more space, they just expanded into the home that was right behind them. And then the other 3 they had rented out to tenants. So we negotiated to buy those 4 particular homes, including the one they were renting. And part of the acquisition was a leasing of that property back to them so that they could continue using it as part of their office space for the next year while they were getting ready to acquire another office location that was larger in size given their expanding business. And so at this point of the story, we're around May 2018. We've purchased that first set of properties. We've been able to refinance out our investors out of those. And so we use basically the same 4 investors to acquire these next 4 properties as well. And all of these properties, both the first 4 from the business owner that we acquired them from, and then these next 4 from the investor, they all actually had tenants in place. So there's a pretty popular strategy for investing that we used with the previous properties that I had mentioned, which is often referred to as the BRRRR method, or the buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat strategy. Is a great way to basically do what's called forcing appreciation. So you buy it at a discount based on the fact that it's vacant and usually in some amount of disrepair. You're going to put the capital in to fix it up. You're going to put a tenant in place so that it is cash flowing. And then you go to a bank and you can get a loan based off of that. Well, with these properties, we basically were buying them at below market conditions and had planned to do those renovations after the tenants had moved out. And so we were very quickly able to refinance those properties, given that we simply bought them at a very attractive pricing, given that we were buying the entire portfolio and that they already had tenants in place. Now, I will take a quick pause to discuss when you buy properties in this way, it is important to understand kind of the sequencing of how events is going to unfold, because when you go through that BRRRR process, a lot of times you're able to secure the renovation capital from investors as part of, presenting to them, hey, here's the purchase price, here's the rehab cost, here's the total all in, here's what that is as a percentage of the after repair value or the ARV, and then basically making sure that you've got lenders lined up who are going to be able to give you a loan for usually somewhere between 65 and 80% of that value to be able to pay your investors off. And as long as all of that math checks out, you can get financing up front. When you go the approach that we did with these ones, where you buy it with tenants already in place, you're usually not going in and immediately doing work on those properties because people are already living in them as their homes. So unless you're buying these properties and planning to kick people out and then start the rehab work, you need to understand that you're going to have to actually finance the renovations yourself, unless you have an investor who's willing to come in after the fact and give you a loan, although that's a lot more difficult to accomplish because there's usually already another lender who's in first position. And a second position mortgage is a much riskier position for an investor to be in. And many investors don't want to be in that particular position where they're behind somebody else. So at this point in the story, we again had these 8 properties that we had acquired, and we started to run into a little bit more of a cash crunch. For this exact reason, we started to see some turnover or the need to turn over some of these properties, and we weren't getting quite as much cash flow coming in to build up to justify the renovations that were needed on those. And so we started to look for an opportunity to flip a property, thinking that that would put some quick cash into our bank account and be able to fuel being able to do some of the needed rehab work on these properties. Fortunately for us, there was a property on the MLS at this particular point in time in a very nice neighborhood of the city that was needing quite a bit of renovation work. And so after a bunch of back and forth and making an offer that was significantly below the asking price, we did eventually acquire that particular property. And we went into it expecting that we were going to spend a not insignificant amount of money doing the rehab, our first major renovation project that was north of $100,000 on the renovations. And so for this particular one, we did go with a conventional bank that was able to give us a commercial renovation loan. And we were basically going to have draws against that particular loan as work was being completed. And very quickly we went into that. This was an older home and did not have central air conditioning, and we had planned to put central air in, and we had budgeted something in the neighborhood of like $15,000 or $20,000 to do that particular project. And it pretty much immediately came in that we were going to have to put in a mini blind split system, a ductless system into this particular home, and it ended up costing us about $15,000 more than what we had budgeted, and had basically on day one eaten into the vast majority of our contingencies for this particular project. Which, as it we got to the finish line on the property, or what we thought was the finish line on this particular property, we were still expecting to make about $30,000, which may sound fantastic, but when you consider the amount of risk that went into not only acquiring the property, but then a 6-figure renovation, coming out with $30,000 is not actually a great margin for all that time and work and money that you put on at risk. Unfortunately, as things would have it, as we went and listed the property for sale, there ended up being a water line break where we had to dig up and repair the water line, which then led to us needing to resod the entire property. We then also had, during the inspection, we had some mold that was found. And also, I should mention, during the rehab work, we found some significant termite damage in the basement that we did not uncover during the initial rehab, because the basement had been partially finished and it was behind the walls. And so all of these things basically ended up eating into that $30,000 profit margin. And we walked away from this project literally breaking even. I think if I remember the numbers correctly, we made about $1,000 after we paid all of our transaction costs, all of our holding fees, paid off the lenders, and all of the budget overruns. So where we originally had expected to be making about $60,000 on this project, as I mentioned, we had eaten away into all of that profit margin with all of these unexpected budget overruns. So where we expected this to be able to fuel paying for rehabs on everything else, it simply turned into another very valuable lesson about what can happen when you invest in real estate. And while I am thankful we didn't lose any money and that we were able to learn all these lessons along the way, it is still nonetheless an important part of the story that I think is important for people to kind of know and understand. In the midst of this acquisition, we actually went back to that same business owner that we bought the 4 properties right in a row from, and we started negotiating with them to buy another 5 properties out of their portfolio. This particular time, it was a few residential properties as well as a commercial property. And so we were interested in having an opportunity to buy a piece of commercial real estate as well. And we got basically all the way to the end of the transaction. We had lined up investors to be able to do all of this, with some of the investors actually having wired their money into the closing when we found out from the existing property managers at the time that the majority of the tenants were actually past due on their rents, and that evictions had not been filed for any of those individuals. And so this was actually happening right over Christmas of 2018. And it really led us to a position where we had to return capital back to the investors that had already wired things in. And we were stuck in a position basically of, do we want to move forward with the deal or how do we want to go? And rather than trying to negotiate with them to keep the deal under contract and have them deliver the properties vacant or with tenants that we approved of, we basically just decided to walk away from that transaction. And that was one of our first learnings of having to, walk away from a transaction and how to manage those conversations with investors, some of which we were able to maintain relationships with, and others we were not able to do so. However, we did cover all of our investor costs, and so any costs that they had, we did fund those. And it's just part of going through the process of understanding that sometimes deals are going to work and sometimes they aren't. And again, how you treat people is one of the most important things in this field of ways to do things if you're going to be in it for the long haul. So with that deal having fallen through, we were back to looking for another acquisition opportunity. And we had an opportunity to buy another 2 properties that were on the same street from investors. They first came to us, they had 4 properties available for sale, and we ultimately decided to make an offer to just 2 of those. The other 2 were in a different neighborhood that was slightly less desirable, and they were trying to put too much value on those particular properties. And so we were able to negotiate just buying the 2 properties out of that. So with the 1 property being occupied at below market rents, the one that was unoccupied, we were planning to go in. We had a renovation budget, if I'm remembering correctly, I want to say it was around $18,000. This was a 3-story home. It was slightly larger in a historic district in the city. And when we eventually got into the property and actually realized that the plumbing was no longer up to code, we had to redo a significant amount of the plumbing, and that put us another $10,000 over budget. So here we are yet again with another property going over budget on the renovation work. And so where I'm going to take a pause in this particular story is that in Wilmington, Delaware, where we are investing in, at this point, all of these properties, the homes are all very old. They our newest home in the portfolio was built in 1985, and our oldest home in the portfolio was built in the 1890s. And with the vast majority of them having been built in the 1920s and 1930s, there is a lot of really unusual and awkward things that happen, whether it's with the plumbing and the drains, the electrical, with lead paint. There are all of these issues that don't exist if you are investing in properties that were built after the 1950s, where there's block construction, poured foundations, where you tend to, not have as much risk for asbestos or lead paint. So it's very important to understand your market and some of the challenges that you have, because for us, these older homes did present significant challenges because there's just simply a lot of things that you can't see going on behind the walls until you get in there and start taking things apart and seeing where the issues are. Now, those 2 properties eventually did work out extremely well for us because, again, we bought them well. And while we did go over budget, they appraised for significantly more than what we had anticipated. And because of the neighborhood that they're in, they have continued to appreciate significantly in value compared to where we have originally paid for those, not only in terms of their value, but also what the market rents for those particular properties will bring. So while there are challenges, and again, I bring these things up because you'll notice that there's a lot of roller coasters and a lot of gut punches in this particular story. At the end of the day, while there is not like this massive amount of cash that is being thrown off by the portfolio, it is by and large at least covering its own expenses. And so as we've had these major renovations come up and major issues and things along those lines, the rents that were coming in from the properties that were occupied were able to basically cover all of these things. And so when you hear these stories about people making a ton of money very quickly, those stories are obviously all true. I'm not saying that they're not, but what you do need to be aware of is, when you're trying to grow and you're trying to scale very quickly, and especially if you're dealing with older homes like we are, there's going to probably be a lot more repair cost and deferred maintenance than what you realize when you go into the properties. And so if you're using like calculators where they talk about, the 1% rule and 2% rule, and your rehabs are going to be this percent of your rent and things along those lines, just make sure you understand that those are all guidelines, and they may be relevant in markets that have newer homes, newer construction, or where there are single level homes, things along those lines, and they may not always apply in your particular area. So there is an element of trial by fire when you're dealing with some of this stuff. So it's just important to realize that, getting in the game is a great thing. And in the long run, this is going to turn out to be a fantastic investment. But it's a roller coaster ride that isn't for everybody. And so I'm telling this story because you'll notice I haven't stopped investing through all of these challenges, right? I have learned lessons along the way, but we have never stopped trying to buy properties as long as the numbers made sense to us. We just kind of roll with the punches, learn as best we can, and try to figure out what's going to be the next best strategy. It's around this time that I remember having a conversation with my business partner around a book that I read called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. And I bring this particular book up. Annie Duke was pursuing a PhD in some form of psychology. I can't remember exactly what it was, but she was a World Series of Poker professional poker player. And as she got out of professional poker, one of her big things were, really diving into psychology was understanding when you have a good outcome, but you got lucky in the decisions that you made that led you there, versus when you make a right decision, but you ultimately have a bad outcome. And so there's a lot of really great lessons to be learned from that book that I read around this particular time that really was influential for allowing my business partner and I to think through the decisions that we made over the last several years of acquiring our portfolio, to figure out where are the decisions that we made correct decisions and simply had less than ideal outcomes, or where were there decisions that we maybe didn't make as good of decisions, and how could we refine our decision-making process moving forward. For the next part of the story, we are actually going to rewind a little bit back to when I bought the home that my wife and I bought when I relocated back from California to New Jersey. And basically, at this point in time, we have welcomed our daughter into the world, and we have decided that we need a larger home. And so we acquired that larger home in August of 2019, and in January of 2020, we rent out our original home to a tenant at that point in time. So again, another example of converting a former prior residence into a rental property. And that went about as well as could be expected. There were some minor things that we had to rehab. And thankfully, this was just before the COVID pandemic really started to take off. So again, January 2020, we moved our first tenant into that property, and COVID really started to hit in March of 2022. And that really is where we our story starts to pivot in the sense that we acquired one more property in June of 2020. And that has been the last property that we have acquired. Since then, we've done a lot of work to continue to turn over some of the properties that had tenants in them. Again, those deferred maintenance scenarios that I had mentioned, where we've had tenants in the properties for a number of years. My very first property, I had a tenant in for 10 years before she moved out. And so again, after 10 years of having a tenant living in a property, there's some work that needs to be done. And so the last 5 years has been a lot of just working on the performance of the portfolio, as well as in 2019, we started our own property management company and brought management in-house because we basically just felt like we had more of the operational experience to be able to run the properties the way that we wanted them to be run compared to the experience we had been having with some of our property managers up to that point, of which we had gone through several of them. And so that really takes us to where we are today. So at this point, if you've followed along in the story, as we sit here in January of 2025, I have 17 properties in my portfolio. They have appreciated significantly in value since I acquired them. Rents have gone up, and for the most part, the mortgages have stayed the same. So commercial mortgages are a little different than residential mortgages. That's something we can touch on in a future video as well, kind of the differences between residential and commercial mortgages. But, I'm in a really great spot, and we're starting to now look at the equity that we've built up in our portfolio and how we can start leveraging that equity to, again, start acquiring additional properties. Although at this stage of things, we are also starting to look at other markets more intentionally around where there's maybe more population growth as well as newer housing stocks, so that we don't encounter some of the issues that we've had with these older homes in Wilmington, Delaware. So that pretty much wraps up where I am today at this point. And so for the next video, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the lessons that I've learned in the past decade of real estate investing to help you kind of reflect on your own journey and how you're going to be able to set yourself up for success as you go through your real estate investing. So go ahead and click the video on your screen, and I will see you there.